Hello and welcome to Nikolai's genetics lessons, and today's problem is Sturtevant provided genetic evidence for existence of 4 pairs of chromosomes in Drosophila by showing that, and you have to choose one of these answers. Take a look. Let's say here is going to be a gene A, which specify one trait. Here is gene B, which specify another trait. For example, gene A specify eye color in Drosophila, and gene B would specify wing length. Also, there are many other different traits. For example, let's say C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. And now think about it. If genes would be on the same chromosome, so here's one chromosome, and here's a gene, say A, and here's a gene B. And during meiosis, all chromosomes would segregate, and if genes on the same chromosome, they would tend also be inherited by the progeny together. But if genes on the different chromosomes, for example, this is chromosome number 2, and here we have genes D and C, then genes D and C also would tend to be inherited together. And if genes A and D on the different chromosomes, they would have a tendency to segregate independently. When we see a tendency that two genes, or at that time they didn't know about genes yet, so they only can compare traits, if we see that two traits have a tendency to be segregating together, we can say that gene A and B have to be on the same chromosome. And if gene D and C also have a tendency of being inherited together, then we can say that gene D and C on the same chromosome. And for example, if we'll have gene E here, we also can say that gene E also would have a tendency to be inherited together along with gene D and C. So now we can connect all the genes in this gene pool and say that these genes have a tendency to be inherited together. And once again, that means that these genes, which code for certain traits, specify certain traits, have to be on the same chromosome. And you may also know that sometimes we may see that two homologous chromosomes may have different alleles. For example, recessive allele D here, recessive allele E here, and recessive allele C here. And sometimes we may see crossing over between these genes, but anyway, the same trait can recombine. For example, we may have a new combination of dominant D and recessive E and C, recessive D and dominant E and C. But anyway, we would notice that still these genes have a tendency to be inherited together, and the more high frequency of the two traits inherited together without recombination, that means that the closer these two genes to each other, and they are linked genes. So all genes on the same chromosome we call linked genes. Again, this is just confirms the theory that genes that have a tendency to be inherited together are on the same chromosome, and genes which are on the different chromosomes is not going to show this tendency and would be inherited independently from each other. So now you see, even when we have many traits and we don't know how these traits relate to each other, just looking at the tendency of being inherited together, now we can separate them in clusters. How many clusters we have? For example, 1, 2, 3, 4 clusters here. This tells us that we have 4 chromosomes. And now let's check answers, and we see that the correct answer is going to be answer B. Drosophila genes cluster into 4 distinct groups of linked genes, and this is going to be our answer. But let's check other answers as well. Answer E, Drosophila genes have on average 4 different alleles. This doesn't tell us anything because in diploid organism, simultaneously for the same locus we may have maximum 2 alleles, but in the whole gene pool there can be many more alleles, say D1, D2, D3, D4, because every mutation produces new variant of the same gene. So this doesn't tell us anything at all. Variant D, the entire Drosophila genome has approximately 400 map units. Also not true, because between 2 homologous chromosomes, the maximum crossing over frequency can be 50%, no more than that, whether gene D can be found here or here due to crossing over. So maximum map units per 1 chromosome would be 50 map units. And if we have 4 chromosomes, so maximum we will have 200 map units. 50 times 4 would give us 200. The overall number of genes in Drosophila is multiple of 4, and this also just nonsense. I don't know what to comment. It's just not true. And answer A, there are 4 major functional classes of genes in Drosophila. And it's also not true because genes are not spread on the chromosomes according to their class. For example, these genes all code for the energy production, and we will find them together. No, that's not true. They would be spread all across the genome, chromosomes, and there is no such a tendency. Now, as you see, the only correct answer is Drosophila genes cluster into 4 distinct groups of linked genes, what we have found here. And this is all for today. Thank you for your attention. Please subscribe for my new videos that I post almost every day. And see you in the next video. Goodbye.